Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Deborah Turnbull and I'm very pleased today to invite Dr. Chloe Hurrell. And Chloe's going to be talking with us about community-based implementation science, the challenges and joys from the perspective of an early career researcher. Hi, Chloe.
Hi, Deb. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. So let me begin by acknowledging that today we're on Aboriginal land, and I'd like to pay my respects to our Kaurna elders here in Adelaide. And I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander women who are with us today and to say um, how good it is for us to be here together. So my name's Deborah Turnbull, and I have got the real pleasure of chairing the National Steering Committee for WHRTN. And I'm going to be interviewing Chloe, who is a postdoctoral research fellow on the EQUIP project. And the purpose of today really is to have a fairly informal conversation about some of the highs and lows and some of the background stories about being a postdoctoral research fellow on a large MRFF funded project. So let me begin and let me say that we're going to spend, Chloe and I'll spend about half an hour together, and then there'll be time for Q&A. And the other thing that I wanted to highlight for you is that you're going to get an evaluation sheet, and it would be really useful for us if you could complete that. So firstly, Chloe, I've got a series of fairly general questions, and I'd like you to begin by telling us a little bit about yourself and your research background, your academic background.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Chloe. I completed my Bachelor of Psychology 2018 and then my PhD in Applied Psychology I conferred October of 2023. So that was really exciting. My PhD focused on the psychological determinants of pro-environmental behavior. So I looked at things like self-efficacy, perceived responsibility, knowledge, risk perception, psychological distancing, things like that. But I was particularly focused on trying to develop interventions to actually enhance those variables to facilitate more pro-environmental behavior. There was two interventions the poor things had to do. So the first component was a really big interest of mine, which is virtual reality. So I taught myself VR and I made a little environment of what the Gold Coast may look like due to the effects of climate change in 2050-ish, I think. And then following that, the participants had to then complete a mindfulness-based intervention as well to try and translate those intentions or willingness to change into actual behavior change, because habits are a really strong barrier between that intention and actual change. So once I completed that in 2024, I was lecturing statistics 3 at the university that I did my PhD in, which is Griffith on the Gold Coast. And then in the second half of last year, I briefly worked for the Australian Institute of Professional Counsellors, which is an online institute. And I was creating a Bachelor of Psychology for them. So made a degree in 6 months, which was an enormous challenge. And then I started on the EQUIP project in February of this year. And that's where I am now.
Thanks a lot, Chloe. So sounds like you've really done a lot in a really short period of time.
Yeah,
You know,
I've
so
tried.
you went straight to PhD from your undergraduate?
I took a year off,
Okay.
not because I wanted to. It's always such a tight timeline between the submitting your honors thesis and starting the PhD, and the proposals are due and your thesis is due. And I wanted my proposal and my PhD to be on something I was really passionate about and well thought out. And I just felt like I didn't have the time to do that properly. So I just gave myself that time. I think that's a really important thing, is that what's an extra 6 months, 9 months in the grand scheme of things, if it means that you're going to do something, one, properly, and two, something that you're more passionate about and committed to. So yeah, I did start a bit later.
Okay. Okay. So what were you doing during that time? besides kind of working out what you wanted to do next?
Yeah, so I stayed tutoring at the university because
Okay,
I had graduated, so I did have the degree. So I was doing
okay,
that tutoring that people do. And I got a bit of travel out of my system because I'd been studying, doing my undergraduate for 4 years. So it was mostly just the research assistant, traveling, a bit of networking, so starting to connect with people on LinkedIn, and I did spend a lot of that time, like I said, really trying to think about what I wanted to do my PhD on, because that can set you up for your career. It's really an important pathway of, okay, this is what my specialty is going to be. I mean, obviously you can pivot, but I took a lot of time to think it through carefully in that gap year I had.
okay. And when you were thinking about that,
Mm,
what came to mind? You said you were thinking about what you wanted your research career to look like, what kind of
mm,
research you wanted to do. What came to mind during that period?
mm. I knew I wanted to help people, which is a very cliche thing to say. But before I actually did my Bachelor of Psychology, I started doing a Bachelor of Environmental Science, because I have always had that interest and passion around the environment. But I was so bad at it, and I hated it because, there was chemistry and all of these things that I found myself not very good at. And so then I switched into psychology, and I really enjoyed that. And so I think I was trying to think about ways that I could come and integrate that environmental science, but from a more psychological perspective, where it was more in my roundhouse. Um, and then I just thought of that, and I was actually researching because the APA releases each year, a list of fields that are trending and popular,
Yeah,
and climate change was like number two or three on that list, or environmental psychology more broadly. And I just thought, oh my God, this is it. And then I started refining my actual idea from there.
that's amazing. I did not realize that, you'd really done so much to think about all of this in advance.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
you also need to think about the employability and things like that. I mean,
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
friends that have very, very niche subjects. And again, I just emphasized how important it is to do something that you're passionate about. But I'll read it or, listen to the topic. And I ask them, like, what career would come from that? And they have answers, but it feels very restrictive of, oh, I would do this. Like, this is the career. And then I think an important thing for me is that I didn't want to be stuck in a bubble. And environmental psychology, obviously, there's academia, and this is so important to industry and government. And so employability was something I was also really thinking about.
Thanks, Chloe. And the other thing you said, which I thought was really interesting, was you spent the time networking.
Yes, you
Yeah,
always did.
tell me about that, because I
Yeah.
think we've got a lot, a lot of early mid-career people here today.
Mm,
This is
mm,
something that we cover a lot in our mentoring um, uh, program. So tell me
mm,
about, how did you go about that? Was it
mm.
informal, just reaching out to people on a suck it and see basis, or was it more systematic and structured than that?
It was a bit of both, because half of my intentions for reaching out to people was for them to be a prospective supervisor. And so I was reaching out to different environmental psychologists or eco psychologists at different universities around Queensland and New South Wales. And so I would have a lot of virtual meetings with them, explain my ideas. But then, it was, even if we weren't the right fit, or they didn't have the capacity, or I wasn't sure if I would necessarily move to that city or state, I was still making that connection with those people. And so I did that a lot. And so very quickly, I had in-person or virtual meetings with some of the major environmental psychologists that are working at universities across Queensland and New South Wales. And then it wouldn't be weird if I was keeping in contact with them, or if I would then go and add them on LinkedIn because, we had just chatted. And so it kind of grew that way. And then I would, find their papers and start reading. And, I like to come into things very prepared. So I was able to sit, "No, I liked this paper you published this year," and they, everyone loves a compliment. And so the network grew pretty quickly that way. And then also, like I said, just on LinkedIn, people that might be relevant or helpful, or that I could learn from. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in that academia space. Like I said, I think it's really important to have skills that are applicable beyond universities to industry and government. And there are always people, for me, in that environmental space that work across all sectors. So I was trying to connect with those people as well.
That's amazing. And how did people react when you just kind of contacted them out of the blue.
I think most people take it as a compliment because it's a sign of saying, hey, I want to keep up with what you're doing in your life. I want to learn from you. I'm interested in connecting with you. And so I think most people are, unless they're, not a very nice person, they're happy to let you passively watch their life on LinkedIn, at the very least. And some people are kind enough to have a quick online chat, even just a 30-minute chat, and you just bombard them with questions and ask them whatever you need to. Most people I found are quite reciprocal because they find it a nice compliment. And I think it's also about putting pride aside and going, hi, like I have so much to learn. Tell me what you know. If you and asking really good questions, I think is really important. If someone does have the capacity and is generous enough to sit and have a 30-minute meeting with someone who just randomly added them on LinkedIn, asking the right questions, like if you were in my position, if you were, 20, 30 years
Earlier. Yeah,
earlier at the start,
yeah, yeah,
what would you do differently? What
yeah,
mistakes
yeah.
did you make? What did you learn? If you were me right now, what would you do? And they're all going to say different things. And you don't need to obviously uptake all of their advice, but it's just sometimes there's real nuggets. You can go, oh my goodness, I would never have thought of that. I would never have done that. And, and then you build in that, and you take what you need and you run with it.
Amazing, amazing. And then came Equip.
Yeah.
So,
And then came a
so we should talk about Equip and quick disclosure for everyone who's online today. So I'm one of the principal investigators in Equip. And before we came on air, Chloe was talking about the real challenges of being the postdoctoral research fellow and continuing to develop her skills and career without, reverting to just doing the hack work for the PIs who
Mm.
didn't want to do it. And that made me think, oh, I hope I haven't done that to you.
No. No, not at all, Deb. I mean, it's a balance. I'll definitely speak to that. But yeah, did you want me to just very briefly start by
Yeah.
explaining? So equip,
Let's paint the picture of Equip, what it
equip.
is,
Yeah.
what it is we're trying to do, how uh how you got involved. Yeah, just the whole paint the story for us.
Sure. So it all started on Seek. No. So I did find the ad on Seek for this, postdoctorate position with Equip. And I was so drawn to it, but I'll briefly explain what Equip is. So Equip is a 5-year, $5 million grant, which is running across 9 rural and regional communities across Australia. So there's 3 in New South Wales, 3 in South Australia, and 3 in Western Australia. And essentially, it's a co-led, co-designed program that helps people who live in those rural and regional communities enhance their resilience, mental fitness, psychological preparedness in response to natural disasters and extreme weather events. So why Equip, I believe why it was successful in receiving that grant is that there's a lot of resources and NGOs and businesses that sit in that recovery space after a disaster happens. So there's the Red Cross and the Army and all of those resources that come in afterwards. In the preparedness space, there is a lot that goes on in terms of physical preparedness. So you've got the RFS, the Rural Fire Service, the Country Fire Service, helping people physically prepare, but not so much psychologically prepare. And it's so important because we've heard so many stories where, yes, you can be physically prepared, but there's a fire, you go into flight or fight. You don't remember where your bag is. And
Yeah.
there's one story that I always come back to where this person, they had their bag and the fire was, this was the 2020 fires. They had their bag at the door and they grabbed it and they grabbed their dog's crate and they grabbed the dog food and they got in the car and they got halfway down the road and realized that actually forgot the dog. And so we can be as physically prepared as we possibly can be, but those coping skills are so important, being mindful, being regulated, and also the social cohesion and community connectedness is really important in those moments. Not being scared to ask your neighbor for something because you've lost power or you don't know where to go and you need help. Especially in the farmers, we're finding this that, rural Australian
Yep.
pokey
Yep.
situation as well. So that's essentially what Equip is. We have two community connectors in each community, and they are basically someone that's really well connected. They know everybody knows them, everybody likes them, and so they facilitate a lot of introductions for us. They vouch for us. They go and put up flyers around town. They will help us set up a stall at the Sunday markets, things like that. And then within each community, we also have a local advisory group, which is 10 members. And what they're doing this year is helping us refine the workshop so that it's ready to be delivered next year. So what that means is we have the bones of the workshop, but every community is different in terms of the natural disasters that it faces, what examples or scenarios would go down well in that community versus which ones I think would be weird. So we sit with them and we workshop the workshop so that it is contextually relevant to that community. So that's essentially what Equip is. Like I said, we're delivering the workshop next year across all 9 communities. This year is about community outreach, community development, because we know that we can't just go in, pop a flyer up on the bulletin board, and everybody's going to show up the next day. There needs to be that trust and that brand awareness, which is what we're really focused on this year. And then in years 3, 4, and 5, we have follow-up surveys, and we're really focused on how we can implement our workshop into a more sustainable format within that community so that when Equip does leave, that knowledge still stays within the community and is embedded in existing organizations or things like that.
Amazing. And Chloe, I prepared these questions ahead of time,
Mhm.
and before me knowing, that you'd done so much homework, ahead of applying for Equip, and had through a series of sort of thought exercises and activities come to the view that environmental psychology was where you wanted to be.
Mm.
What attracted you to apply specifically for Equip? Were there many projects like this, being promoted through Seek, or how did this one stand out to you?
Yeah, it's a good question. There were a few postdoctorates, especially a bit close. I live on the Gold Coast. There was some at Griffith and some at the University of Queensland, in Brisbane. But what is the most attractive element of Equip to me is its application. There's so many postdoctoral students or early career researchers that are just stuck to a desk and all of their output is papers, and that's so important. Obviously we need research, but what gets me is every paper, in the discussion section there's this practical applications component of this is what could happen, it could inform this policy, it could do this, but Equip, we're actually doing it. Like I am out in these rural communities in the middle of absolutely nowhere at a pub with Steve. And, it's so important that we're seeing that direct translation of research and applying it. And we're actively involving the community in that research, not just writing papers, doing literature reviews, and then disseminating it in journals that are expensive for them to access and then going, here you go, we've helped you. That's not the case. So it's how applied Equip is, and the fact that what we say will benefit the communities, we're actually out there doing it ourselves, not just saying, oh, someone else should do these things in the future.
Thanks, Chloe. And I think we're characterizing this piece of research as in the mold of translational
Mm,
research, aren't we? Insofar as it's taking an evidence base, an evidence informed base, some pilot work that shows that this approach has got lots
Mm.
of promise, and then rolling it out in a very real world setting. So it's kind of in the wild research where you
Yes.
can't control every single variable. And this is something we're really, challenged by within a team, getting the balance right between, it being a pragmatic design, but also wanting it to be, as robust as possible.
Yeah.
What do you see as an early career researcher as some of the real challenges of doing research like this?
I think it does take a particular person, because the thing is that there's a very diverse set of skills, especially in the position that I do, that is required. Obviously, as much as I love to be out in the communities, I do have to write the ethics applications and the protocol papers and the trial registrations. And so that, those strong academic skills and writing skills and research skills are really important. But also I then have to, like I said, go out into the middle of nowhere and sit in a pub with Steve and have a chat. And, they can spot that I'm a city girl 100 miles away and that I don't know anything. I can't differentiate between types of cows yet. I'm really trying. They're so patient with me, but have those skills. And so it's not just communication skills, or being personable. It's the flexibility within that. It's being able to communicate the same information in an ethics application or a trial registration to Steve at the pub, and pitch a quip and ask if he would be interested in being a participant next year, or being on that advisory committee, or being a community connector. And the direction that those conversations go in, again, that flexibility is required, especially because a lot of the people that we speak to have, I mean, there's no other word for it than traumatized
Yeah.
by these extreme weather events. And as soon as we bring it up, we want to talk about a quip, but they want to talk about that they lost all of their cattle and their property 5 years ago, and they still haven't recovered, and the insurance took forever, and their neighbor down the road wasn't insured, and then they got angry at them because they felt jealous, and the politics in the towns and how much people have lost. And it's so triggering for them. And so there's a lot of patience that's involved. And of course we want to hear them. We're not just going to go, so equip. Anyway, back to what we're doing. And so being there for those people and holding space for those people is really important. And also it like I said, it's something that they carry with them. And so sometimes we'll go to a community and someone's doing someone's having a barbecue, and we'll speak to the RFS and they go, oh my God, the phones have been going off all day because someone's having a barbecue, but everyone sees smoke. They go, oh my God, it's a fire. And everyone's on the phone all day to the RFS because someone is cooking some steaks. These people are um, so sensitive to the smell of smoke and these triggers. And so back to your question of what's challenging, it's the diverse skill set within the towns, and being there for those people, being able to hold space for them, but also keep in mind that we're there for a quip, then also being able to disseminate that information in an academic way. And of course, it's, for me personally, been a very big jump from going to a PhD where your thesis is the center of your universe, to being in this multi-institutional, multinational actually, because we also have the University of Colorado on board, team where there's, I think there's 18 of us, so a million different personalities and emails every day. And there's so many things that you need to um, pay your attention to at once, and diverse between. So that's also been a challenge, going from this is my thesis and this is the only thing that matters, to I have to do this and this talk to this person and this person. And then I'm going to go on the road for 3 weeks and then I've got to come back. So that's been a really big challenge for me, but it's something I love. And the other thing, it's not so much a challenge, but having to put your pride aside, or your, not pride, but expectations, I think are really important. You finish your PhD, I'm a doctor and I'm on top of the world. But like I mentioned, this is a quick story. Um, one of the communities we have is Nimboida. And like I said, this year we're doing a lot of community outreach and community engagement. And so a couple of weeks ago, they had like a music festival. And so we said we'd love to sponsor it, and we'll set up a stall and we could do a speech on the stage. And we'd also be happy to offer some in-kind support by, helping out with the cleanup the day afterwards and things like that. And they said, great, one of you can sit at your stall, the other person's on traffic duty. So 2 weeks ago, I was a lollipop lady in a high-vis shirt with a stop sign, directing traffic in the middle of nowhere. It's probably the most overqualified lollipop lady ever, but that was just what I did that day because that's what they asked me to do, and that's how Equip helped and offered in-kind support at that music festival. And I was a lollipop lady for 2 days. So I think expectation management is something that I always have to go, oh, that's actually part of my job, even though someone told me that last year, I wouldn't have believed them. But
Amazing. There's a couple of things you mentioned there that I want to circle back to, but I wanted to read out to you something that's in the chat from Leslie, who says, what a beautiful description of how we need to conduct co-design and community involvement. And I agree, you've really, painted an amazing picture about what involvement actually means. Love your story from a final year PhD student conducting co-design and your acknowledgement of what we need and how challenging it can be. And as a PI who's really involved more in the hardcore academic aspects of the trial, I think I'm only really, coming to learn about this community involvement piece, as I listen to you now. It can be to balance what we need and what they need. Yeah,
mm,
that is amazing. What you've said about going to communities wanting to promote Equip, and all people want to talk about is, yeah, their personal experiences, and being in a space where you can acknowledge, respect, and honor that, and
mm,
still try to get the job done for Equip.
yeah.
Um, and Leslie finishes by saying, thanks for offering the conversation.
Thank you, Leslie. That's really
So that's very nice, and I'm glad it's coming across as a conversation. I picked up on a few things you said. Um, Chloe, how can you train for this? Can you train for it? Can you, or is this
well,
something
the
that,
lollipop lady training was no. Look, yes, yeah, absolutely, you can. I mean, I think that a PhD and the right supervisory team, there's always going to be that progression of those academic skills that I explained are obviously necessary in that early career space, and that continue to be harnessed. In terms of the community engagement and community outreach
yeah,
side of the work, yes and yes and no. We have quite a few introverts on the team, and that they try and do the community outreach stuff,
yeah,
and they do it, but I always explain it as like a social battery thing. And I don't know if that's really correct, the correct psychology behind it. But introverts, they'll come out and they'll do the community engagement work with us, but by the end of the day, they are absolutely drained. And then there's other people where being out in those communities and talking to these people, it fills our battery, and it's so enjoyable. And I could hang out there and chat with them all day. So there's those skills in terms of being flexible in those communication skills. That's definitely something that um, can be approved upon. I don't talk to country before this position. I didn't talk to people from the country very often, and so I did have to learn and kind of reframe how I phrase my sentences and things like that to be more aligned with them. Um, but it's definitely been worth it. I'll go into a community now, and these are really like, hours and hours and hours from a major city. I think the smallest one is, a population of 200 and something. But I'll walk into the pub or the cafe, and they'll go, "Hi, Chloe," and it's the most special feeling. And then I know their names. There's a lot of names in my head, but I can go, "Oh, hi, Steve," and I don't think that I would have picked that place as my next holiday destination. And so if I hadn't been a part of this project, I never would have been able to see and experience these really, really special parts of Australia that we have. Um, Australia's climate is so unique, and these communities are so unique and so special, and being able to chat with them and meet them on their level is something that is really important to me. So it's a skill that I'm really actively working on. It's much easier for me to write a paper, but it's really important for me to meet them at their level. So that's something I'm working on.
So that's interesting. You talked about kind of matching language,
Mm,
and,
mm.
reframing how you say things.
Yes.
Tell us about that. How do you actually learn how to do that? Is this something that is intuitive? Um, yeah, give us a sense of
There's
like,
multiple ways. So usually when I go out in the community, I don't go by myself. We have obviously a very big team, like I said, and the co-investigator that I often go with ha lives in Armidale, where the University of New England is, and so here I'll just kind of model his language sometimes. The other thing that's really important is that the communities are very specific in their terminology around climate change. One, we can't even use the word climate change very often. I'm just using it in this conversation, but it's a term we try to avoid. We can say a changing climate, or weather variability. We can talk about natural disasters, but they don't like the word climate change. Resilience is another word that they don't like, even though our project is increasing psychological resilience. And even within communities, there's a lot of variability. So, for example, the one of the communities in South Australia um, is along the Murray River, and so they're extremely prone to flooding, and we can't use the word flood. They use the term high river, just
okay,
because flood is very triggering for them. And so,
okay,
there's high river, or there'll be a high river next week, and that means it's going to flood next week. And
okay.
and so there's a lot of information that is needed to be retained in my job. It's firstly, there's names, so many names, and then specific terminology to be respectful. On top of all that, and I won't go on to it forever, but there's also the cultural safety element, because a lot of these communities have a high population of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander individuals, and cultural safety is also another really important part of this project. And so having yarns with them and being respectful of elders and how they go about it, and even in the context of bushfires, there's cultural burns versus the RFS doing controlled burns. There's just so much to it, and it's really important for me to be mindful of all of those things every time I communicate with someone in the community.
This is amazing. So for the early and mid-career women who are on the line, what recommendations or suggestions would you make for those who are wanting to do this kind of research and those who are already embarking on it? And in terms of how you developed these skills, you talked about observing, modeling, listening, being
Mm.
flexible, but did you actually do? Did you do any reading about it? Are there any publications about how to develop these community engagement skills? Um, any academic, lenses on this piece, or is it more, in your opinion, a practical piece?
I think it's a bit of both. It's like riding a bike. You can explain to someone how to ride a bike, and that might help, but you also just need to get on the bike. And so I did do a lot of research. But again, like I was saying before, some of the communities are so specific, like the High River, that is only unique to that community that we've been to.
Yeah.
And so some of the research, while it's helpful, may not be applicable to our research. And so it's taking that with a grain of salt. So it's a bit of both. It's understanding um, not so much the language of communication, but I don't want to say politics, but um, entering a rural community is extremely difficult, because they are quite tight-knit,
Yep.
very trust-based, and we're just these random researchers. They think that we are coming in, lab coats on, and we know it all, and we're going to tell them what they're doing and what they're doing wrong. And so challenging that stigma for them by just sitting at the pub, in those things are, there's some research on them, because people do track that methodology of how they were able to um, engage with a rural community. but you also just need to do it yourself, because reading about someone walking into a pub and everyone's staring at you and kind of looking you up and down because they know that you don't belong there is different to actually experiencing that feeling. And it's a bit of an uncomfortable feeling. So in terms of advice, exposure to it as much as possible is really important, because reading about something and actually doing it and having those skills is very different. It's important to base it on a theoretical framework, but the applications don't always directly translate perfectly in every community.
Okay, and you said, um, notwithstanding the fact that it's only of a limited usefulness. So there are papers out there where people talk about and reflect on their experiences and some of the things that they found useful in
Mm,
engagement.
mm.
What sort, where do people find these kinds of papers,
That
Chloe?
was the very first job that Susie, who's the chief investigator on this project, tasked me with, is doing a literature review on this. So it's a lot of PhD papers where they kind of have the word count to go into the details of these things. Unfortunately for us in this project, a lot of that research is based on where they're working with hospitals or education. So there's these existing frameworks in place, and they know exactly, they go to the hospital and then they get a patient list, or they go to the school and they get this list. Whereas we don't have that existing infrastructure where we go, oh, we need to go here and talk to these people. So we've been very fortunate where the communities that we picked, we knew one person in those towns.
Right, right.
um, Through different, so Equip has different partner companies. So Disaster Relief Australia is someone who we've partnered with, and one of the employees in that in DRA, Disaster Relief Australia, lives in Warren. And so we picked Warren because she lives there, and
Okay.
she introduced us to the pub owner, she introduced us to the hall owner, the produce store, which is where everyone buys their, cattle feed. And then we went to those people and said, okay, what events are on? What events can we sponsor? And then we started going to the events, and then we started hosting our own events like information sessions, and being introduced to those key people in town. And that's another paper that I am wanting to write. And it's this thing that I'm systematically tracking, is how this web grows. Because they're not really on social, they have some social media, and that's something we use, but obviously technology in these towns can be challenging sometimes, and the farmers don't sit on TikTok, obviously. So, there's this web that grows very slowly. This person introduces this person, and then we had the markets, and three people put their names down as potentially being interested in being participants. And so, it's this web that grows, but it's very slow at the start because they can be quite distrustful. But just knowing one person, it opens the doors.
Okay, so um, that idea of having one person that you kind of use to grow your flower, if you like. You start from this little kernel and then
Yeah.
it all organically develops from there.
Yeah.
Um, and Chloe, you said you wanted to write some papers about this as well. So
Mm,
the goal is to, and I know this is something we feel really strongly about in the team, that we want to make papers not just about the outcomes, but about the process and the learnings,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
is something that we, value a great deal in Wharton,
Mm,
disseminating our learnings, what works, what doesn't work.
mm.
Um, maybe you can tell us what such a paper would look like, where you might send it to. Yeah, just some general thoughts on those kinds of publications.
I like your point about also discussing what doesn't work. And that's
Yep.
something that I do think is lacking the methodology of, oh, we did this. But I mean, what I found is you probably tried A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and they didn't work. And then you did H, and that's what worked. And that's what you've put in your methodology if we did this. Um, because we, for example, in Warren, our first information session, we booked the hall, we ordered catering, and no one showed up. And
Yeah,
that was just, and it wasn't that people weren't interested in Equip, but it was the time of day, and the farmers were out on the farms, and the school, or the kids were at like the soccer, or whatever. Um, and so I think also pointing out, if I do write those papers, I am going to systematically go, these people introduced us to these people, and this is, and then this exponential list of contacts that grows, and then comparing different not methodologies, but recruitment sources. So like I said, obviously we do the social media, but there are some private Facebook pages that has some success in other communities, not so much in some. Some just prefer their phones. And so, okay, should we text these people? What is the ethics around that? Community bulletin boards, getting our community connectors to just text people and go, oh, come talk to Chloe. And it's so informal. And I think that's the difficulty with translational research, is that they'll go, oh, we put up a flyer and on Facebook and we boosted our ads so that these people in this postcode would see it. And it doesn't work. That type of thing doesn't work. You need to get that one person that you know to send a text message out to this person, who'll then text this person, and then maybe we'll have a flyer up somewhere, someone, the school principal or the favorite school teacher vouching for us, because then they tell the parents. So that's something that I am just going to systematically go, look, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, and this is what was different across the towns. I'm not sure why it's different. It could be, something to do with the states. It could be something to do with the weather disasters that they experience. It could be the type of resources they have. It could be a number of these things, but also highlighting the differences across the communities is something that's really important, rather than just a blanket statement of this is what worked and this didn't.
That's amazing. And Chloe, can you tell us a little bit about how you systematically, collecting your data, the observations that will form the data for this paper? Do you do you write physical diaries? Do you have spreadsheets? Tell us about, how you make sure that your observations, your reflections, your insights are sort of captured in a way that is systematic.
It's systematic. So I've mostly been using different Excel documents for that. So I have a really big contacts list Excel document with notes about each person. They're the school principal, or they're in the pub. And then I also have one that says, on this date, we had this, we sponsored the music festival, or we had an information workshop. This person helped us organize it. These three people showed up. This person gave us their name and contact. This, and next date we had this event. And so I'm systematically tracking what events, how they were advertised as well, because that would influence the number of people that
Yeah,
actually attend the event, and
yeah,
then the names of those people, because I also think it's important for me to track. Obviously, the participant data is anonymous, but some of those people that attended our early events went on to be the community connector, or the advisor, or someone on the advisory committee. And so how did they hear about us? What did we do right in that moment that led them to go, I want to be a part of this. I want to help you actually refine it. So I'm very carefully, systematically tracking every event, who came, were they interested? Were they interested in a paid position, or just want to be a participant next year? Obviously, that's fine as well.
that's
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yep. So it's all very, as you said, it's all very systematic. There's
the amount of money we spend on each event as well.
right, right, right. Amazing. I want to open it up for questions in a minute. Before I do, I wanted to ask you one question and then one last one. You mentioned some time back about personalities, and I'm guessing there you meant personalities in the PI team as well.
You're gonna
Um,
ask me a tricky question about
yeah,
who.
yeah. So I'm really curious about this because our PI team, it comprises of, hardcore epidemiologists, biostatisticians, community psychologists, a full range of people. And we know with the main funding bodies that the Wharton membership will be applying for, like NHMRC, MRFF. Um, Increasingly, those bodies are looking for, multidisciplinary pieces that address complex issues and that need to be considered from a range of perspectives. So, how do you deal with, a PI team of 10, 15 people, including the AIs, where there's so much diversity and differences in maybe worldview? How do you cope as the research fellow in a context like that?
Well, I hope I cope with it well.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. It's I love it because I think it's so easy as researchers to be focused on our field, and because, you know, even if you've done the
Yeah,
degree, the PhD, that's still 10 years that you've been looking at situations like these, or looking at problems through a specific theoretical lens or
yeah.
framework. And it's so easy to have these, um, what are they called? Not goggles, what like,
Um, I know what you mean.
I'm getting tired. Anyway,
Blinders,
the
blinders.
yeah,
Yeah,
blinders. Thank you. It's so easy to have these blinders on, but not actually realize that you have them on.
yeah,
And then we'll be in these larger meetings, and one of the ecologists will say, "Oh, did you think about this?" And all the psychologists go look at them and go, no. But we approach it with curiosity and openness, of course, and go, why would we be interested in that? Can you please explain that? And they go, oh, this is important because, you know, the biodiversity in the landscape and the river, and
yeah,
it influences
yeah,
this. And we go, oh, okay. And then we incorporate it. And so that's obviously why we have multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary research. So I think it's that importance of recognizing that no matter what field you're in, it's not even the personalities, it's just the being in a specific field. It's so easy to have these blinders on and go, let's use this theory, let's use this framework,
yeah,
and
yeah,
neglect that there's so many others. And so being open to integrating those, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which theory or frame, it's whether or not it's helping the communities. And I think that that's what's really easy to lose sight of, is it's not for us, it's not for papers. I mean, for me, it's not. It's, are we actually improving the psychological resilience and capacity of these people who experience some of the most traumatic, I mean, just the traumatic stories I've heard this year. I don't care if we use an ecology-based framework.
yeah.
I don't care if it means that it's what's best for them. So I think it's coming at it with that approach of keeping in mind what's important.
Beautiful. And one last question, and then I'm going to hand it over to our Wharton membership. Where do you see yourself going in all of this, Chloe, after Equip is, done and dusted, and we've
Mm.
got an amazing, program, and we think that we're making a contribution. This is all theoretical, of course.
Really.
Do you see yourself as, building from Equip into, your perhaps research grant applications for
Mm,
yourself? You
mm.
the whole purpose, I think, of the postdoctoral research fellowship is to encourage you to develop your own independent research program in the medium to long term. Tell us about that.
I think I'm really fortunate that the lead investigator on this project, who would also kind of act as my postdoctorate supervisor, Susie, she raises this question with me a lot, and she's very, very, very focused on making sure that when I do finish this project, my CV is very well-rounded. Before this, I was speaking to you guys about, you know, it's so easy for late career researchers to give the RAs or the postdocs kind of the hack work. It's almost like the
Yeah,
equivalent of, like, you know, the intern going and getting coffee, and you want them to like you, which is something I don't think we want to always admit. We want these people to like us. We want to prove ourselves to them, and so maybe we will go and get the coffee. We'll do the work that they can't don't want to do or don't have the time to do. But it's also really important to respect the fact that you are responsible for your own resume. You are responsible for your own CV and experience, and what you present at your next job. You're responsible for your own career. And so finding that balance between proving yourself and wanting to be liked, and being willing to be in those hard yards, but also not just saying, oh, I just made coffee for 3 years, I don't have anything to show for it. And so I think that that's a really important line to balance. But in terms of what I want to do in the future, Susie has really been making sure that my CV is very well rounded, so I don't have that problem of having to have an uncomfortable position. And I don't want to make coffees for you anymore. Not that she makes me do that. But like I said to her, I think what's important to me at this stage in my career is not confining myself to anything. I want to be able to finish this project and say, oh, I want to go into industry. I wanted to go into government, or I do want to write another grant and develop and see if we can implement this workshop in 9 more rural communities. We haven't done Northern Territory yet, you know. So transferable skills are something that is the top priority for me at this stage. I just think that's important not to restrict myself too early.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Chloe. That's such an excellent point to finish on. I'm going to now ask our Wharton members who are out there on this webinar what sorts of questions you've got for Chloe, and you can put them into the webinar chat, or I think you can take yourself off mute and even just ask us out loud. Anyone out there would like to ask any specific questions? Chloe, while we're waiting for any questions to come through, maybe I can circle back to you saying you want to keep your options open and have transferable skills that you can
Mm.
apply to sort of industry, government work. I guess, not for profit. We might just circle back to that in a minute. Leslie said, what would Chloe's top piece of advice be if she thinks back to the last 6 months of her PhD?
Um, that's a good question. I was like most PhD students, where I left a lot of my writing to the end, and so that last 6 months was a frantic writing. The last probably 50,000 words in 6 months. Um, So I would probably even go, if you do have the capacity to go further back than that and don't leave all the writing until the last minute, so that you can have a good sense of, making sure that you're not cramming a lot of stuff into the very end. But I would also at that stage be thinking about, it's very challenging because obviously the last 6 months are extremely stressful, but starting to look into that future of what do you want to do. And you don't have to know, like I said, I took a whole year off after I finished my bachelor's just to think of my PhD idea. But going on Seek, and something I did was I like put in the keywords like postdoctorate or something, and I put on alert so that I would get emails if something matching my search criteria became available. So just keeping things on your radar. It's never, ever, 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 ever too early to start doing those informal networkings, asking people, hey, I'm thinking of doing a postdoctorate, or just asking people if you could pick their brain for half an hour, so that when you do get to that finish line, which is obviously the best feeling in the world, you're not in that position where you've gone, okay, now what? You've actually already started. It's like when you open up a Word document and you go, oh my God, I don't know how to start. But if you've got some stuff there, it's so much easier to start filling it in. So spending those last 6 months filling stuff in so you don't finish and then look at a blank Word document, so to speak.
Amazing. And coming back to what you said earlier on, transferable skills.
Mm.
I mean, this is, part of the parlance now, part of the modern PhD. We're trying to provide people with transferable skills. What do you mean by that?
That's the thing. I think in industry, government, academia, there's some skills that are valued regardless of which of those three you would go into. Obviously, good communication skills. This is written, oral, listening skills. Academia, if we, it's very, not very, but mainly writing skills. And so improving those verbal skills, like, when I was doing my PhD, I won the 3-minute thesis competition. I don't know if some of the other universities have that. Um,
Amazing.
but I won that, so because I was really interested in that as well. Community engagement, or just stakeholder engagement is a really important thing. And again, that's organizations, industry, government, academia. Stakeholder engagement is something that's really important. Like you said, in this modern world, so having a LinkedIn that's up to date. If somebody does want to keep in contact with you or reach out to you, how do they find you? You're not just this person with a, I don't know, private Instagram account and no one can find you or reach out to you. We do live in a very technologically based world. But also having, good references, because I also think it's not a bit cliche, but it's who you know as well. So having good networks is also something that's really important. So always keeping that up to date is something that I think is really important as well.
Thank you so much, Chloe. So
Thank you, Deb.
I don't know that we're going to get any more questions. I'll wait for a few seconds, and if nothing comes on, we might wrap it up. Anybody out there in Wurton land who'd like to ask a last question? Okay, well, thank you for coming everyone today. Today we've had an amazing talk entitled Community-Based Implementation Science, Challenges and Joys from the Perspective of an Early Career Research Woman. And I'd like, on behalf of us all, to thank Dr. Chloe Hurrell. And Chloe has been talking to us about the EQUIP project, and I think you'll all agree that some of the insights that she shared with us today are just the stuff you can't get from books. So thank you so much for your generosity today, Chloe,
No,
and
thank you.
for being so generous with yourself and your own learnings and your own journey.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Thank you. Thanks, Deb. Thank you, Linda. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.